Republican lawmaker Kevin Kiley worked as a teacher, attorney, now assembly member. His next goal is to become the governor of California. He joins us now. And Kevin, first tell us why you're running, why you'd like to be the next governor of California.
Well, I'm running to try to restore integrity to our state government and return to the idea of government by the people. You know, I got involved. I ran for office 5 years ago, having, as you said, worked as a high school teacher, having defended the Constitution in our courts, having been a prosecutor, keeping our communities safe. But I'd seen how our state government was failing us in so many ways, failing to just do the basics. And so I've been fighting to turn things around over the last 5 years. But I see this recall election as an opportunity for the people of our state to put their mark directly on our government and to set California on a whole new course. And having been fighting for that for the last 5 years in the legislature and seeing how broken our state government is in so many ways, I know how to go about on day one starting to fix it.
Well, unlike most of your competitors, you do work in politics. How would you say that could benefit you if elected?
Well, I've seen that, what has broken our state government is that we have a state capital that has been corrupted, that is controlled by lobbyists and special interests, way more so than you usually think about politicians sort of being subservient to interests. Here, it's just a matter of just total capture. And that's why the quality of life in California has been declining. And so, what I decided to do, I became the first statewide elected official in modern California history to say, I'm not going to accept any funding from special interest groups. I'll only take backing from individual citizens. These special interests and their lobbyists give hundreds of thousands of dollars to every legislator. They've given tens of millions, really over 50 million to Gavin Newsom in this recall election alone. And that is what has been, causing our state to decline, is that we have a government that doesn't actually serve the people. And we've seen that more than ever over the last year and a half of our lives.
Let's talk about some of the issues. A lot of the candidates critical of the governor's handling of the pandemic. How would you grade his response? And of course, how might you handle things differently?
Well, I'd give him the worst possible grade on the scale, because unfortunately what this governor did is he immediately seized this moment of utmost vulnerability for our state and used it as a political opportunity. That's what he said from the very beginning, actually, that he was using it to advance his ideological agenda, or even worse, to reward the big special interest groups that put him in power. And, the issue that I think is perhaps the worst one of all is that he did a school shutdown that was not guided by science, was not guided by public health, was not guided by the interests of our kids, but it was entirely about special interest groups. And California was last in the country, 50th out of 50, in getting our kids back to the classroom, and while also having some of the worst public health outcomes in the country. The governor knew that having kids in school was the right thing to do. He sent his own kids to in-person private school, but because of his subservience to special interest groups, he deprived millions of California kids of that same opportunity.
Let's talk about the public school system. As a former teacher, you've been critical of that system. What do you think are the main issues there, and what does need to change?
Well, the reality is that for a while, we've had a public education system that has been on the decline. We keep spending more and more money, and yet achievement gaps keep growing. Our education outcomes are among the worst in the country. As a matter of fact, even prior to COVID-19, we ranked 49th out of 50 in terms of how well our students perform in underserved communities. I taught in one of those communities. I taught 10th grade English in inner city Los Angeles, and the average reading level of my kids when they entered was 5th grade. And the reason for this is very simple, that we have a public education system that is controlled by special interest groups whose business model is keeping kids trapped in failing schools. And then during COVID-19, that business model became keeping schools shut altogether. And so I would want to completely reorient that paradigm, to have a public education system that actually serves students, that is student-centered, that allows parents to have choices as to where they spend their child to school, that has accountability built into it as well. There are very simple reforms that we can make that other states have made, that have advanced student achievement, that have closed achievement gaps. Yet in California, we have been moving in precisely the opposite direction. And every attempt that I've made to bring meaningful reforms to expand educational opportunity and equity in my role as vice chair of the Assembly Special Education Committee, or Assembly Education Committee, hasn't gone anywhere because of the political barriers that are in place.
Every candidate talks about, even the governor himself talks about the problem of homelessness in California. How would you tackle that issue?
Well, I would actually get serious about the homelessness issue, because what we've seen in California is that it's just gotten worse and worse, even though we've spent enormous sums of money. Just this year, Gavin Newsom dedicated $12 billion more towards homelessness spending. And yet this approach has not worked in California. We see that homelessness is actually improving in other parts of the country while it's getting worse here. In fact, our unsheltered homeless population in California, this is a staggering statistic, is 9 times larger than the next closest state. And the governor's own top mental health advisor even admitted in March of this year that homelessness in California is not a money problem, it's a leadership problem. So I would bring new leadership. I would look at what's worked in other states that's actually on the basis of evidence and proved to be successful in helping people transition out of homelessness and turn their lives around. You need to have a facility where people can go. There needs to be a roof over their head. We can't have people living and dying and languishing on our streets. But once there, we need to connect them with the needed services, whether that's mental health counseling, substance abuse treatment, job training, family reunification, and the other measures that have been proven to be successful.
And let me talk about taxes, state taxes. How do you feel? Are there any increases you actually support?
Well, no, I mean, our budget has more than doubled over the last 10 years, well more than doubled. It's now $267 billion. That's what Gavin Newsom just signed. And, you know, I talk to people who say, well, yeah, they don't like the taxes that are so high here, but at least if they were getting something in return, that would soften the blow a little bit. But, you know, do you walk around and see perfectly paved roads and beautiful dams and reservoirs and sterling public schools? No, of course not. Everything has continued to get worse. The quality of life in California has continued to decline, and that is because we have a capital where spending is not directed towards serving the people of the state. So what I would say is, let's get back to basics. Let's pave our roads, manage our forests, maintain our grid, keep our communities safe, support our police, do the things that government is supposed to do. That's my basic pitch to voters of all partisan affiliations, is that something much more fundamental than sort of the typical partisan political issues is at stake here. It's about having a government that serves the people. And by the way, this recall election has been kind of pushed back a ways. And so it's only going to be a year until the next election. So if you're someone who is, let's say, reluctant to cross party lines, then my message is take a chance on change. See it. You're not signing on for 4 years. You're signing on for 1 year. See how things work out. And then, you know, you'll have an opportunity to reassess in 2022.
Well, one thing that is affecting our quality of life, and we're certainly paying for it, are the wildfires. What's your plan to protect Californians from that growing threat?
Yeah, and even as we speak, the Calder fire, which is not far from my district, has engulfed South Lake Tahoe. There's been an evacuation there. I was out, observing the fire just a couple days ago, and it's truly just terrifying scenes that we've become all too accustomed to in California. And unfortunately, this is largely because of negligence on the part of the state. You know, our forests have become tinderboxes. Most experts would say we need to be doing 1 million acres of forest management in a given year. The governor went around boasting about how he was doing 90,000 acres, but in fact, an investigation by NPR, Capital Public Radio, revealed that he was exaggerating by 690%. So I would actually prioritize keeping our forests healthy and resilient and removing the obstacles that stand in the way of doing that.
Well, finally, I want to give you the chance to tell voters why you deserve to be the next governor.
Well, I've been fighting for 5 years to get our state on the right track. I grew up in California. I was born and raised in California, and I want to keep this a state where folks can stay, where they can raise their family, where you can retire. But, we see that more and more people feel like California isn't that place for them. For the first time in California history this last year, we had more people leave the state than came here. Our population declined. And this used to be the state where anyone can get ahead. Now it's the state that so many people can't wait to leave behind. And so I've been fighting at the Capitol for 5 years. I've been fighting the last year and a half to have a more public spirited approach to the COVID-19 response. And I'd be ready on day one to answer the call for fundamental change that this recall represents with the tangible reforms we need at our Capitol and the new direction that we need for our state.
Well, Kevin Kiley, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And of course, for more information about the recall election and the other candidates vying for Governor Newsom's seat, you can head to kpix.com/recall.